I was given a book by Nin Panyawutto to read some time ago, and I haven't really applied myself to it in any thorough kind of way. It's a book about the history of Western thought. It's quite well, seems quite well written. But when you're trying to lessen the amount of thinking in your mind, it's probably not the best book to read. Anyway, I did flick through a page or two a few days ago, and I did find something applicable and interesting. It was talking about the Reformation, which, although it happened 400 years ago, it still has implications on Western thought, Western ideas, and our own thoughts and ideas, probably. Talking about a basic difference of opinion as regards the human intellect, ability to realize truth. And for the Catholic position had, by the time of the Reformation, was basically that the human being or the human mind reflects the mind of God, or is an emanation of the mind of God, or somehow the principles underlying the human mind are those which underlie the universe. Therefore, the human intellect is capable of knowing the truth because it's a part of the truth, as it were. This is simplifying somewhat. Whereas the Protestants, the Lutherans, felt that man is basically defiled, sinful. They increased the distance between man and God and made God almost completely other, and stressed the difference between man and God. As to say, increased the goodness and the power and omnipotence of God, and decreased the goodness and significance of the human being. And so the human intellect is absolutely incapable of realizing the truth of things. So you had a very basic difference which is underlies Western attitudes to human intellect or human mind, whether it is or is not capable of knowing truth, depending on its relationship to the divine nature of things. So I thought, where do we stand on this? What's the Buddhist attitude to this? And my answer is that the mind which is free of the five hindrances is the mind which is capable of seeing the truth of things. So the mind does have the capacity or the potential to realize truth, but as long as it is enveloped by or clouded by the five hindrances, then it is incapable of doing so. So the absolute first priority for any serious seeker after truth, anyone who wants to realize the true nature of existence, is to transcend the five hindrances. And this is in this state of mind beyond the five hindrances is the ground for authentic knowledge. Any knowledge which the mind is still clouded by the 5 hindrances, is still defiled knowledge. This is why Ajahn Mun said for someone whose mind is still affected by the 5 hindrances, even if they speak of the highest Dhammas, most profound Dhammas, then they drag it down into the dirt. But even if an Arya Pugala or an enlightened being or one whose mind is free of the 5 hindrances speaks of very worldly matters, perhaps he might, under certain circumstances, feel necessary to do so, then they become elevated, they become Dhamma. So this is the goal in our lives. Buddha has taught, teaching us that we have certain responsibilities, certain duties, certain tasks in our lives as samanas. The first is to realize the nature, to comprehend the nature, the full extent of dukkha. The second task that we take upon ourselves is the abandonment of its cause, tanha. The third is to realize or clarify nibbana. And the fourth is the development of the Eightfold Path. This is the framework for our life as samanas. What are we trying to do? We're trying to understand what suffering is, which means, of course, that we don't yet know what suffering means. This is I feel, a very important point to remind ourselves that actually knowing what the word suffering means is synonymous with enlightenment. That's the abandonment of the cause, the realization of cessation, of nirodha. The full development of the path lies in the comprehension of dukkha, what that word means. To have any hope of doing that, then we have to be constantly seeking to take the mind to the other shore, free of the 5 hindrances. So we have to get to know those hindrances and to develop a sense of hiriyottappa around those hindrances. Because hindrances are secondary phenomena. What I mean by that is that certain things are arising in our mind as the fruit, the result of previous karma. The 4 of the 5 khandhas: the physical body, feelings, perceptions, sense consciousness. These are the results of karma created in the past. It's the sankhara khandha, which is the new sankhara khandha, which is the creation of new khandha, of new karma. And the hindrances are things that we create from old karma, if you like. They're a result of proliferation. There's sankhara there. There's adding on to. There is, in other words, what in Pali is called yoniso manasikara. That means there's a wrong, unskillful reaction to certain phenomena that arise in the mind. So hindrances are things that we do. They're not things that happen to us. For instance, if you take Ajahn Brahm's example about the glass of beer this morning, so after he's developed these positive perceptions and thoughts and so on, he drinks a glass of beer. He doesn't have to think about it yet and experiences pleasure. sukha vedana from drinking the beer. And that sukha vedana is not a defilement. It's the result of the karma that is created through thinking and proliferating about it, so that the moment he experiences the taste, there's a pleasant feeling there. It's important, I think, to distinguish between these things that just happen automatically as the results of previous karma that we've created, and the sankhara, the present addition, the proliferation, the yoniso manasikara in this phenomena. So with the first hindrance, the explanation of how that hindrance arises is that there is at yoniso manasikara, it means an unskillful grasp of what we call a subhanimitta. A shorthand way of explaining ayoniso manasikara here would be any way you have of thinking about something or approaching it or relating to it which increases unwholesome dhammas and decreases wholesome dhammas, we can say is ayoniso manasikara. Any way you have of thinking about an object, approaching it, relating to it, which decreases unwholesome dhammas and increases wholesome dhammas, we can call yoniso manasikara, skillful attention. So we're always attending to things, and the point is how skillful or unskillful we are in attending to things. Now this particular nivarana comes around because we skillfully, unskillfully attend to a pleasant nimitta. This is the same word nimitta as we find in the phrase samadhi nimitta, sign, pleasant sign. And the reason it's used is that because of our biases, our views, tendencies, when we are confronted with with a pleasant object, the mind will narrow its attention and focus more and more exclusively on the pleasant aspects of that phenomena. The aspects of that phenomena which are neutral or even unpleasant, unbeautiful, the mind will censor, will screen out. And so when we think of that object, think of that person, think of that event, that memory, what we're actually remembering of it or perceiving of it is just one particular part of it. It's not the whole thing. So that's why it's a sign of that object rather than an accurate representative of it in all of its complexity. So it's called a nimitta. In the case of something pleasant, it's a super nimitta. It's a beautiful nimitta. And we have created and nurtured these various kinds of super nimittas in our minds. Might be to do with, might be sexual matters, might be to do with food, might be to do with places we've been, things we've done. Our memory there's a cluster of super nimittas in our minds. And the mind takes up one of those and starts kind of fondling it. And it says fondling this super nimitta, sort of trying to exaggerate it and trying to sort of squeeze out every kind of little last moment of pleasure from it. And that kind of fondling of the super nimitta, the yoniso manasikara, the super nimitta, makes it become stronger and more prominent, and it draws the mind. mind to it like a magnet. And this is how the first hindrance completely overwhelms the mind. Similarly with the second hindrance, we also have asubha nimittas. Nimittas in our minds, signs, shorthand signs for people, events, experiences that we don't like. And we take the sign to be the reality, or we take the sign to be an accurate shorthand representative of the reality, when in fact it's dependent on screening out, censoring out a lot of important information which would change the very nature of the memory, of the perception of the object. It's not just unimportant stuff, irrelevant stuff that's been screened out. So the mind takes up that asubha nimitta, and it might be something external to us, as I said, a person, a place, or it might be something internal, some character trait of ourselves, one of our own character traits, something about ourselves we don't like, or some experience or other, and take hold of that and attend to it in a way that all the associated unwholesome dhammas become stronger, and wholesome dhammas, sense of perspective, forgiveness, metta, and so on, are weakened. This is how ayoniso manasikara works. So in the first one, the fondling of the subha nimitta, then a sense of dispassion, letting go, so on, those dhammas weaken. Dhammas of attachment and fascination intensify. With the third hindrance, then there is the unskillful attending to feelings of heaviness, dullness, depression, weariness, taking up a particular feeling, unpleasant feeling, and increasing it, indulging in it, we may say. So there's always this sense of indulgence in each of the five hindrances. This is not something that just happens. You're not just sort of affected by the five hindrances. It's important to see that there is something coming from you. There is something initiated from you. This is sankhara khandha. This is what we call brungdang. This is kamma, intention. There is the intention to just lay back, indulge in these dull, stump-like kind of mental states, depressed mental states. And that's the point you have to catch, where you acquiesce in it, where you say yes to it. And remember reading years ago the history of the criminal mind, and this criminologist, after his survey the whole history of crime from the sort of Stone Age time until modern period, a sick book like this, which I read all the way through. And his basic thesis was that in the criminal mind, talking about the relative importance of heredity, genes, environment, and so on, it was his belief, and from his research, that with every criminal, there's just this critical moment where he kind of says yes and just goes with the intention. There is just this critical moment where something tells him this is wrong. He just goes ahead anyway. That kind of override mechanism. And with the hindrances, there is this indulgence, and it's saying yes to this tendency to indulge, to make much of, to give importance to these kind of phenomena. This is the yoniso manasikara. So in the case of sloth and torpor, then the skillful way of attending to it is with energy, vigor, what the Buddha called the element of initiation, is in bringing up this sense of effort. Not just letting the mind go with it, just to sort of settle back into the flow of dullness. With agitation, then there's the indulgence in the wrong way of attending towards movement of the mind, agitation of the mind. And through that wrong way of attending to it, it increases. If you, with the attention, attend wisely towards it, find some way of, it's a matter of, we say yoniso manasikara, isn't it? Getting a handle on things, using your intelligence, ingenuity, daring to get a handle on something. And with agitation, a way of inclining towards the peace of the mind. Not panicking when the mind starts moving around so much, not getting discouraged, or not just sort of, oh, what the hell, and just letting your mind follow it. A sense of patience and moving away into the spaces between the agitation, or coming back and looking at the one who is agitated. Finding a skillful means. There's something, it's not just an awareness of the presence of hindrance in the satipatthana practice, but it's knowing the way of bringing it to cessation. Because there's something that you're doing that you have to stop doing. And it's a skillful means of finding the way of stop doing what you're doing. With doubt, then it's the wrong, unskillful, unwise way of attending to things that give rise to doubt. Understand that there are certain things that you can't work out, yet you have to make that kind of leap of faith and just sometimes be willing to be wrong. Taking the Buddha's word for it for the time being, being willing to take that risk, or attending skillfully to those things that you do feel confident in. Perhaps the things that you have doubts about are not so important, and the things that you have certainty in are far more central. But because you let your mind just niggle away at the things that you doubt about, they suddenly become to seem like major objections and far more important, significant than all the things that you do have faith in. This is the way that yoniso manasikara works. You lose your sense of proportion, lose your sense of perspective. So it's only when the mind can let go of these hindrances without a sense of regret. And notice that also there is this sense, this lingering, sometimes subtle, sometimes not too subtle sense of regret at putting these things behind us. You know, it's Ajahn Chah's favorite story of the man carrying the big boulder around on his neck, and he's sweating and straining and suffering and complaining, and complains to somebody, and somebody says, well, if it's that much suffering, well, it's obviously because you're carrying that big rock on your shoulder, on your back. Why don't you just put it down? And so he realizes that there's a big rock on his back, and he thinks about it, and he says, well, if I could, but if I put that down, what would I have to carry around? I wouldn't have anything to do. So kind of be at a loose end. It's the sense of the pain is what the English saying, we say, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. You just assume, this is a devil, okay, but it's something that I know. And I feel somewhat safe, I know it's this much suffering. But who knows what would happen if I gave up this kind of suffering. And this is why we have to come back to the Buddha's words. And the Buddha saying, monks, I don't say that the penetration of the truth, of the arising and passing away of the five khandhas is accompanied by pain and distress. It's accompanied by joy and happiness. These kinds of sayings that the Buddha left us are priceless. They remind us that it's not dangerous, it's safe, and it's something which will lead to great joy and happiness if we're willing to do it. Basically, we're not in the real world yet. The real world starts when you leave the sphere of the five hindrances. As long as you're still within the prison of the five hindrances, you don't see things clearly. You don't know, the Buddha says, you don't know what is truly of benefit to you, yourself. You don't know what is benefit to others. You don't know what's benefit for both of you. You don't know what's right and what's wrong, clearly. You're living in a it's like being under the influence of a drug. It's a distorting drug. It's a hallucinogenic drug. This is most people, or all people who haven't practiced, you can compare it to being affected by a hallucinogenic drug. And someone once asked Charles Tart, I don't know if you know, why is it that people are so easy to hypnotize, most people, and his answer was very good. He says, because the normal consciousness of the human being is just such a small, it's just an inch away from the hypnotized state, that it's just so easy just to tip the ordinary mind over into the hypnotic state, because it's almost there already. That's the mind of the five hindrances, and that's what as samanas and bhikkhus we have to strive to put behind us. And we have all the tools of that the Buddha gave us, the sila, samadhi, panya, especially this samatha practice of anapanasati. This is the road to freedom from five hindrances. And once you get into the beyond the five hindrances, then it's a whole new landscape, a whole new world, a whole new vista possibilities. So I'd just like to offer a few words of encouragement to you this evening.